When I first met my landlady, she smiled and teased, "I can be generous, if you're polite enough." I thought she was joking. But the more time we spent together, the more I realized, she wasn't just talking about rent. I still remember the first time I saw her. It was late afternoon, the sun slanting low, casting golden lines across the narrow hallway of the old apartment building. My suitcase wheels clicked unevenly against the tiles, and for a moment I wondered if I'd made the right choice moving here. Then she appeared. My landlady. She was standing by the doorway, keys jingling lightly in her hand, as if she'd been waiting for me. She must have been in her early 40s, though there was a grace about her that made age feel irrelevant. Her hair framed her face in loose, careful waves, and when her eyes met mine, I felt something shift inside me, the kind of moment you don't expect but never forget. "Ah, you must be the new tenant," she said, her tone warm yet edged with a playfulness I couldn't quite place. I nodded, managing a polite smile. "Yes. I hope I'm not too early." She tilted her head, studying me for a beat longer than necessary. "Early? No. Polite, yes." Then her lips curved into a teasing smile. "And I like polite people. I can be generous, if you're polite enough." Her words caught me off guard. I laughed lightly, unsure how to respond, but inside, the phrase lingered. Was it just a joke, or did she mean something more? She led me upstairs, her steps measured and sure, the faint click of her heels echoing in the stairwell. I followed, carrying my bag, and I couldn't help noticing the way her presence filled the space, confident, calm, a touch commanding. It wasn't intimidating, though. If anything, it drew me in. The apartment itself was modest, but the way she showed it made it feel alive. She pointed out the little quirks, how the window in the kitchen stuck if you pulled too hard, how the heater rattled in winter but worked just fine. She spoke with an ease that made me feel welcome, even though this was clearly her space first, and I was only borrowing it. At one point, as I fumbled with the door lock, she stepped closer, her hand brushing against mine as she guided the key. It was nothing, just a brief contact, but I felt it all the same, a warmth spreading through me, unexpected, almost startling. "There," she said softly, withdrawing her hand with a little smile. "You'll get the hang of it." I muttered a thank you, trying not to show how much that moment had unsettled me. As she walked me back to the door, she turned once more, eyes glinting with mischief. "Just remember what I said," she teased lightly. "I can be generous, if you're polite enough." The words hung between us, and though I smiled, I knew they would stay with me long after she left. That was the beginning. A simple move into a new apartment, and a first meeting with a woman who seemed ordinary at first glance, but carried something in her presence that I couldn't quite name. Something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but knew I wouldn't be able to ignore. It didn't take long before the apartment began to feel like home. Not because of the space itself, the place was small, with creaky floors and an old radiator that groaned like it was carrying the weight of the world, but because of her. My landlady. She had a way of appearing in the quiet corners of my days. Sometimes it was practical, stopping by to check a loose hinge or remind me of the recycling rules. Other times, it felt less about business and more about connection. One evening, I found her in the hallway, balancing a tray with 2 teacups. "You look like someone who hasn't had a decent meal today," she said, her tone light, though her eyes searched mine with quiet concern. I laughed, scratching the back of my neck. "Guilty. I've been unpacking all day." Without asking, she pressed the warm cup into my hands. Her fingers brushed against mine, just a second, just enough to notice, and then she leaned against the doorframe, sipping her own tea. The tea was simple, but the moment wasn't. The faint scent of jasmine floated between us, mingling with the clean, subtle perfume she always seemed to wear. The hallway was narrow, our shoulders almost touching though neither of us moved to widen the space. "You'll get used to this place," she said softly. "It's old, but it has character. Like me, perhaps." Her smile curved just enough to make me wonder if she was joking, or if there was something she wanted me to see beyond her words. In the days that followed, small rituals began to form. She'd stop by in the afternoons to water the plants on the stairwell, and I'd often end up joining her, holding the pot while she fussed with the leaves. Sometimes she'd ask me to carry something heavy up the stairs, her thank you lingering in the warmth of her voice longer than it needed to. It wasn't anything dramatic. No grand gestures. Just simple, everyday interactions, yet they carried a kind of intimacy I hadn't expected. One night, the kitchen light in my apartment flickered and went out. I was fumbling with the switch when there was a knock at the door. She stepped inside with a small toolbox, her movements confident and precise. "Men your age usually know how to fix these things," she teased, crouching under the fixture. I chuckled. I never claimed to be useful. She glanced up at me then, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Oh, I'm sure you're useful in your own way." The comment was casual, but the way her eyes held mine as she said it sent a ripple of something deeper through me. As she stood, dusting her hands off, she brushed against me in the narrow kitchen. Not enough to call attention to, but enough to make me aware, of her nearness, of the quiet electricity building between us. By the time she left that night, the light was fixed, but something else was broken open inside me. A realization. This wasn't just landlord and tenant anymore. There was a rhythm forming between us, quiet but undeniable, a rhythm I didn't dare name yet, but one I couldn't ignore either. It happened on a quiet Friday evening. I'd just come home from a long day, expecting to collapse on my bed, when I found a note slipped under my door. The handwriting was neat, a touch elegant. "Dinner upstairs. Nothing fancy. Come if you're hungry. M." I didn't even have to think twice. Her apartment was just one floor above mine, and when she opened the door, I was hit with the aroma of roasted garlic and herbs. She wore something simple, a soft blouse tucked loosely into jeans, but there was something about the way she carried herself that made even the most ordinary evening feel intentional. "Come in," she said, her voice carrying that same playful lilt I'd grown used to. But tonight, there was warmth beneath it too, something softer. The table was already set. A single candle flickered between us, not extravagant, but enough to cast a golden glow across her face. I took my seat, trying not to notice how the light seemed to soften the edges of her expression, how it brought out the faintest glimmer in her eyes. We talked easily at first. She asked about my work, my day, and I listened as she told me about hers, small frustrations, funny stories. She laughed often, a laugh that filled the room and made it impossible not to smile with her. But somewhere between the second glass of wine and the last bite of food, the conversation shifted. "You know," she said, swirling the wine in her glass, "most tenants don't last here. Too many rules, too many quirks. They get impatient." I raised a brow. "And I've lasted, what, 2 weeks? That's impressive." Her lips curved into that teasing smile again, the one that always left me wondering how much of it was a game. "Maybe you're more patient. Or maybe you're just polite enough to stay on my good side." The words were playful, but the way she held my gaze as she said them, it felt different this time. Longer. Heavier. I laughed lightly, but inside, I felt the tension shift. It wasn't just teasing anymore. The silence between us stretched, not awkward, but charged. She leaned forward slightly, her arm brushing mine as she reached for her glass. My breath caught, such a small touch, but it was as if the room had grown warmer in an instant. Her voice dropped, softer now. "You're different. Most people don't listen the way you do." For a moment, her confidence slipped. There was vulnerability in her eyes, an honesty she rarely allowed to surface. And it was that glimpse, not her teasing, not her playful remarks, that unsettled me most. I wanted to reach across the table, to take her hand, to let her know I felt it too, that invisible thread tugging us closer. But I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I offered a quiet smile, one I hoped carried the words I couldn't say aloud. The night ended simply. She walked me to the door, her shoulder brushing mine as she leaned in just enough to whisper, "Thank you, for staying." It was nothing more than that. Just words. Just a look. Just a touch. But it was enough to change everything. It was late. Too late for visitors, and yet there I was, standing at her door with a half-empty toolbox in my hands. She had called earlier, asking if I could help with a stubborn cabinet hinge in her kitchen. When she opened the door, I expected the same confident, teasing woman I'd come to know. But tonight, she looked different. Not less graceful, never that, but softer somehow. Her hair was tied back loosely, her blouse unbuttoned at the collar, and there was no carefully constructed smile waiting for me. Just a tired one. "Sorry," she murmured, stepping aside to let me in. "I didn't mean to bother you this late." "You didn't," I said quietly. "I was awake anyway." The hinge took no more than 10 minutes to fix, but I lingered in the kitchen, wiping my hands while she poured us both a glass of water. The silence was different tonight. Not playful. Not heavy. Just, real. She leaned against the counter, staring at the glass in her hand. For a long moment, I thought she wasn't going to speak. Then, almost too softly to hear, she said, "You know, people think I'm strong. Independent. Untouchable, even. And I've played that role for so long, I think I started to believe it myself." Her voice faltered, and my chest tightened at the sound. I stayed quiet, letting her words come in their own time. "But the truth is," she paused, tracing the rim of her glass with a fingertip. "Sometimes it gets lonely. This apartment, this building, it's full of people coming and going. They pass through my life like seasons. No one stays. Not really." I didn't know what to say. She had always seemed so composed, so self-assured. To hear her admit something so vulnerable felt like seeing the world tilt. I set the glass down and took a careful step closer. "You deserve better than that," I said softly. Her eyes lifted to mine then, glimmering in the low kitchen light. For the first time, she didn't look like my landlady. She looked like a woman searching for something, for someone. She gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Listen to me, getting sentimental with my tenant. I don't usually do this." Her attempt at humor didn't hide the truth. Her voice trembled at the edges, and I felt the urge to close the distance between us, to offer something steadier than words. So I did the only thing I dared. I reached for her glass, gently taking it from her hand and setting it aside. My fingers brushed hers in the process, lingering longer than they should have. Her breath caught. Just faintly. But enough. We stood there in the hush of her kitchen, no sound except the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythm of our breathing. She didn't move away. Neither did I. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you, for listening." It was a small thing. Simple words. But the way she said them, like no one else had listened in a long time, stayed with me long after I left her apartment that night. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before: her teasing had always been a shield. But behind it, was a woman who just wanted to be seen. It was close to midnight when she knocked on my door. The sound startled me, 3 soft raps that carried urgency but not panic. I opened it to find her standing there in a thin cardigan, her hair loosely pinned, a slight flush on her cheeks. "Sorry to bother you again," she said, her voice low. "The power just tripped in my apartment. I don't trust myself with the fuse box." I nodded, grabbing a flashlight. "Of course. Let's take a look." Her apartment was dim, shadows stretching long across the walls. The only light came from the flashlight in my hand, its narrow beam cutting through the darkness. She walked close beside me, so close that our shoulders brushed now and then as we made our way to the back utility room. I crouched to check the fuses, focusing on the wires and switches, but I was acutely aware of her presence behind me. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, warm, floral, steadying in its own way. When the lights finally blinked back on, I turned and found her standing very near. Too near. Her eyes caught the sudden brightness, shimmering in a way that made my chest tighten. She laughed softly, a little breathless. "I don't know what I'd do without you." It was meant lightly, I think, but something in her tone betrayed more. I straightened, and in the narrow space, the distance between us vanished. She lifted her hand as if to tuck her hair back, but her knuckles grazed my cheek instead. The touch was unintentional, maybe, but it lingered. For one suspended moment, neither of us moved. I could hear the faint hitch in her breathing, feel the warmth radiating from her body so close to mine. I wanted to close the gap. God, I wanted to. To pull her against me, to tell her that she wasn't just my landlady anymore, not to me. But something held me back. Respect. Fear. The awareness that a step taken in that direction could never be undone. She must have felt it too, because her hand hovered there a second longer before she dropped it quickly, retreating half a step. Her laugh was nervous this time, breaking the silence that had thickened between us. "You're too young to be rescuing me all the time," she teased, though her voice was softer than usual, unsteady. I managed a smile. "Maybe. But I don't mind." The tension eased, but it didn't vanish. It stayed, humming beneath the surface like an invisible thread connecting us. As I left her apartment that night, she stood by the door, fingers curled lightly around the frame. Her eyes lingered on me, as though she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to. I didn't press. I just said goodnight. But long after I returned to my own room, I could still feel the ghost of her knuckles against my cheek. A touch so brief, so accidental, and yet powerful enough to keep me awake until dawn. The storm rolled in without warning. Rain hammered against the windows, and the air smelled of wet earth and electricity. I was halfway through making a late dinner when another knock sounded at my door, not hurried this time, but soft, almost hesitant. When I opened it, she stood there holding a folded blanket, her hair slightly damp, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "The power went again," she said, her voice carrying both amusement and resignation. "Do you mind if I waited out here? It's darker in my place than I care for." I stepped aside immediately. "Of course. Come in." She crossed the threshold, and just like that, the small apartment felt warmer, fuller. She set the blanket down on the couch and glanced around, her gaze landing on the half-cooked pasta bubbling on the stove. "You were cooking," she said softly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," I replied, maybe too quickly. "Stay. Eat with me." So she did. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, the storm growling outside while candlelight flickered between us. She was quieter than usual, her usual teasing replaced by long silences, her fingers tracing idle patterns along the rim of her glass. After a while, she leaned back and studied me with a kind of searching intensity. "You know," she said, her tone low, "I wasn't lying the first time I teased you. I can be generous, but only with people who are more than just polite." Her words hung in the air, heavier than they should have been. I swallowed, forcing myself to meet her gaze. "And what am I to you, then?" Her lips parted, as if she wanted to laugh it off, but no sound came. Instead, she reached across the table, her palm pressing gently against my chest, right over my heart. The touch was light, tentative, but it carried more meaning than any teasing remark ever could. "You're different," she whispered. "You listen. You see me. I don't remember the last time someone made me feel that." Her eyes shone in the candlelight, vulnerable in a way I had never seen before. My hand moved almost instinctively, covering hers where it rested against me. My thumb brushed the back of her hand, a steady, reverent gesture that said more than words ever could. "I look forward to seeing you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "More than I probably should." The storm raged outside, but inside, time felt suspended. Her breath caught, and for a moment, I thought she might lean across the table, closing the last inch between us. But she didn't. Neither did I. The restraint was almost unbearable, but necessary. She withdrew her hand slowly, lingering a heartbeat longer before letting go. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling at the edges. "For saying that." We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. Something had shifted, something undeniable. By the time the storm eased and she left to return upstairs, I knew one truth with absolute clarity: whatever this was between us, it was no longer a game. The days after the storm felt quieter somehow, though nothing had outwardly changed. We still crossed paths in the stairwell, shared the occasional cup of tea, exchanged little jokes. But beneath it all, there was a new honesty, a thread between us no longer hidden by teasing or silence. One evening, she knocked softly on my door again. This time, there was no excuse, no broken hinge, no power outage. Just her, standing in the doorway with that careful, hesitant smile. "I made too much soup," she said simply, holding a pot in her hands. I stepped aside, heart thudding in my chest. "Then you'd better come in." We ate together on the couch, bowls balanced in our hands, the television murmuring quietly in the background though neither of us was really watching. It wasn't the meal that mattered. It was the closeness. The way she tucked her legs beneath her, leaning just slightly toward me. The way her laughter came easier now, softer, like she didn't have to wear armor in front of me anymore. When the bowls were empty, she set hers aside and stayed near, her shoulder brushing mine. A small touch, but steady. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, "I worried I was making a mistake, letting this happen." I turned to her, my brow furrowed. "Letting what happen?" Her eyes lifted to meet mine, open and unguarded. "You. Me. This, closeness." I told myself it was wrong, that it wouldn't last. But, she exhaled, a small, shaky breath. "I don't feel lonely anymore. And I don't want to go back to the way it was." For a moment, the room fell into silence, save for the faint hum of the radiator. I felt her words sink into me, heavier and more meaningful than anything she had said before. I reached out, slow and deliberate, and let my arms slip around her shoulders. She hesitated only a heartbeat before leaning into me fully, her head finding its place against my chest. The quiet weight of her settled there felt right, as if she had been meant to fit into that space all along. I could feel her heartbeat, steady and calm, and my hand traced slow, absent circles along her arm. Neither of us rushed to speak. There was no need. The closeness said more than any confession could. After a long while, she whispered, "Do you remember what I told you? That I can be generous, if you're polite enough?" I smiled into her hair, my voice low and certain. "I remember." She tilted her face up, her eyes shining with warmth. "Well, you've been more than polite." I chuckled softly, pressing my cheek gently against her temple. "And you've been more than generous." We stayed like that, held in each other's quiet presence, the flicker of the television painting the room in soft shadows. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed, it was something deeper. A beginning not built on teasing or loneliness anymore, but on choice. On affection freely given, and quietly returned. And for the first time since I moved into that old apartment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. That night, as she rested quietly against me, I realized her teasing words had led me to something far greater than I ever expected, not just generosity, but love. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video, share it with someone who loves slow burn romance, and subscribe for more heartfelt tales like this one.